Hello, Mike Rabon there in Oklahoma City. Am I right, Mike?
Well, close. I'm about 150 miles south of Oklahoma City. That's our next big town to go to, so I'm kind of out in the boonies, as we say here.
Look, let's start at the start. I've got here that you were born in Port Arthur, Texas. Now, Janis Joplin was born there too, wasn't she?
True. Not a lot of folks know or are aware of that or bring it up or mention it, but that's absolutely true. I left Port Arthur in my mother's arms when I was about 8 months or a year. We moved to Oklahoma, where my parents nabbed a job as school teachers out in the country. So I'm not sure how to... when I'm promoting my book or records or something in Texas, I'm a Texan. When I'm promoting in Oklahoma, I'm an Oklahoman, so I'm a little each.
So are you speaking with the Okie accent or the Texan accent?
Well, a little bit of both, because it all melts together. The Red River is the only thing that separates us.
So you can pass off as a Texan to a Texan as well if you put on the Texan accent?
Why, heck yeah, I can.
There you go. Okay, so Mike, you go to Oklahoma and your parents are school teachers. What first got you interested in music? Where did that come from?
One cold Christmas night out in the country, way out in the country, I received for Christmas 45 turntable, 45 RPM, and I got 2 records. They were both by Elvis. One was Heartbreak Hotel, and the other one was Hound Dog. And the minute I put those on, everything after that was pre and post. I mean, that was the defining moment. I think I was 11. Those were both on Yellow Sun record label out of Tennessee.
That inspired you to pick up a musical instrument?
I started picking up anything I could find. I tried making one out of a cigar box and wood, and that didn't work out. I found a fiddle in our old schoolhouse. It looked a little like a guitar, and it sort of sounded like one if you just played it just right. So I thumped around on that for a while until my dad decided that I was totally serious. And so he ordered me a Stella student guitar from Sears and Roebuck. That's just Sears now, but back then it was Sears and Roebuck.
What happened to Roebuck?
Yeah, and so it cost. I remember it costing a lot of money. It was $18.75 plus shipping, and it was a lot to my dad. Yeah, so he bought it for me, and I strummed on that thing, and I learned the chords in one night, almost. Most of them that mattered.
When did you start thinking about joining a band, or did you think of going up there and singing somewhere? What was the next step there?
The first thing I had to do was master the guitar to my satisfaction, which didn't take long. But after that, I started looking around and seeing if I could play with other people, and I found out that I could. There weren't a lot of folks to choose from, but me and some other guys would get together, sing and play. And I did that and I sort of put the guitar down a little bit to finish high school. When I got out of high school, I did 6 months active duty in the Army, and then I got out of the Army, enrolled in college. And in college is where I formed the band, because that's really the only reason I enrolled, was try to find some people that wanted to play in the band.
This is in Durant, Oklahoma, is that right?
Yeah, Durant.
Durant,
Oklahoma, which is only 50 miles from me, and it was a state college, and I got a dorm room. My dad paid for a dorm room, and I put my amplifier up to the window, plugged my guitar in and played, and attracted everybody on campus almost, including the dean. Men, but I attracted some guys that wanted to play, and I found out they could play. And so we put a band together. There was 5 of us. I had a guy that could really play keyboards really well, and then I taught my roommate how to play the bass. And then we had a guy that quit the football team just to join the band, could play rhythm. And then I recruited a local guy there in Durant as a drummer, Jimmy Wright. We just went at it, playing Bo Diddley songs, because Bo Diddley, as great as he was, you only needed to know one chord.
Yeah, he made that chord very famous, though, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. So we played that, and we played beer busts out at the lake, and we played in beer joints on either side of town, and that was pretty much the only venues.
Was this when you called yourself the Mutineers?
Right. We thought that was a swashbuckling, really daring-sounding name.
A bit like Paul Revere and the Raiders, that sort of feel.
Exactly. And I was already really on fire, but a fraternity brother of mine brought down an album one day to my dorm room, and it had 4 heads on it. He said, "Take a look at this," and I did it. I'd never seen anything like it. Of course, it was Meet the Beatles album. When I put it on the turntable, it just stoked the fire even hotter. I knew I was going to get a hit record one way or the other, whatever I had to do. So I put these guys together, and we decided that after school was out in the spring, of 1964, we decided we would drive down to Dallas and see if we could get a job. Texas was only 130 miles away. So we drove down there and got a job. And get this, we landed a job with no planning in a club called the Pirate's Nook, and we were the mutineers.
Wow.
You get the connection there. Pirates Nook and mutineers. Of course, it was a dive, it was horrible.
Did they pay you enough money to get by?
No, not really. No, we had to resort to stealing, which I'm not proud of. But we feel like the 7-Eleven Corporation could afford it. Well, it was just a little peanut butter here and there, nothing big. But we played there 4 hours a night, 4 hours a matinee on Sunday in the afternoon and 4 hours Sunday night. And we did that for like 6 months. So you either get good or go home if you do that kind of schedule.
And so you got good, obviously.
We got good enough. The crowds loved us mostly because we were a little bit like the Paul Revere and the Raiders. There was a lot of antics that went on stage. But, after 6 months, a guy walked in and asked us if we were interested in making a record, and we said, of course we were. And I hadn't even written anything. But we took him up on it, and he took us downtown. It was a little local label called Abnac Records. The guy signed us up to both a management and a local record deal. And so we brought in Dale Hawkins. I'm sure you're familiar with Dale. He wrote the song Suzuki, so he was our producer. He went to the studio with us, and we cut several big fat flops for the company. And when we were busy working out who was going to do the lead singing, which turned out to be me, and who was going to be doing exactly what in a studio. So we were still growing at the time, and it was just kind of a big mess, the first few records that we recorded. Finally, our manager realized that if he just left us alone and let us write what we wanted to write and work out who was going to sing what, that things would go a lot better. So we did that, and as it turned out, my voice was not the best voice, but it was the most commercial sounding voice. We had an old Wallen Sack tape recorder, and we quit the club and spent all of our time just playing to that tape recorder and playing it back until we finally wrote a song called I See the Light.
And that was a hit?
That was a hit, yeah. We were signed to a local label, and they had distribution in like 3 or 4 states. So by the time that Hanna-Barbera in California picked up the distribution, well, the record would be number 1 in Dallas. By the time it got to be number 1 in Chicago, it already went down the chart in Texas or in the southern states. So it was kind of a squirrely deal. And so it showed up on Billboard as like number 21, as high as it got. But it was a bona fide, genuine hit record.
It was the old days there, Mike. Things didn't move as fast these days. It happens instantaneously on the internet.
Absolutely. Well, I could have quit right then because I had achieved my dream, and I'd done what I said I was going to do since I was 11 years old. Of course, we didn't quit, but that gave us enough, I don't know what you call it, enough hand, if you will, to get on some tours with Dick Clark and play with Paul Revere and the Knickerbockers and some of these local guys, the Rascals and Strawberry Alarm Clock and Sam the Sham and those people. And so we were going through Seattle one night after ending a tour and coming back to Dallas. I looked up at a sign. I just happened to notice it said Western Union on it, which was not unusual. I saw the sign. I thought, what if we wrote a song and it was a girl breaking up with a guy, but she was doing it highly technical using a telegram?
She didn't text him, did you?
No. She didn't text.
And didn't use Facebook either.
Yeah. And so I mentioned it to the guys there. Everybody said, yeah. So we got back to Dallas and we went right in the studio. And we had a lot of credibility with our manager at that point because we'd already written one hit record. And so we went in the studio and recorded that in about 45 minutes. We had to work out what a telegraph might sound like if it was audible. If it were sending a message. And we came up with a little dit-dit-dit-dit-dit.
That little dit-dit-dit-dit was probably worth $1 million in sales.
Quite a few more than that.
Yeah.
Although we never got a true accounting. But
that's the real catchy melody, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you know what it was, Nick? It was simple. We recorded that on a 4-track Scully tape recorder, and then anything we wanted to add, which was almost nothing, we overdubbed by mixing it down and recording as we mixed it down. So it was very, very simple, and the sound was real wide and nice and clean, and as opposed to maybe 25 tracks these days. So simplicity was bliss as far as I was concerned. We recorded that, and when our manager decided to use his own label, we got off of HBR, they made the cartoons, Hanna-Barbera, the Flintstones, and all those. He quit them and just put that out on his own label, and it was Abnak, A-B-N-A-K.
Why did he call it Abnak? Do you know, Mike?
His name was John Abner. I'm not sure exactly where he got that name. Maybe he was an insurance millionaire, actually, our manager was. But he was not very creative as far as a lot of the stuff he did in his business, he just ripped off of other people. And the label looked much like the Atlantic label. So anyway, he put it out on Abnak. It went to number 4.
It was a
huge... out of the number 1 spot by, I believe, Something Stupid by Nancy and Frank Sinatra.
Oh, okay.
And which everybody on earth bought that. And... and Eleanor Rigby. I think We Can Work It Out. I'm not sure.
You had some tough competition there, though, Mike. You don't get that sort of competition these days.
And, before we released the record, or even before we released I See the Light, our manager brought us up to his office and he said, guys, I'm fixing to tell you something you don't want to hear, but I'm going to change your name because the British influx is so... there was Dave Clark 5, Herman's Hermits, the Beatles, I could go on and on. And the charts were full of those guys. He said, let's do the opposite. Change your name to the 5 Americans and put out some music that doesn't sound anything like British. And so we didn't agree, but we agreed because we thought the Mutineers was pretty cool.
In retrospect, I suppose it was a good idea because it did make you stand out because there was, just to tell our listeners, it was a real British invasion on the charts there in the USA. It seemed like every British band had a hit over there at that time.
That's right, and the American groups were sounding British, like Sir Douglas Quintet.
Or the Buckinghams? How English-sounding is that? They were from Chicago. They call themselves after the Queen's house. Buckingham.
I'm picking up your accent,
Can you understand it?
No, I'm beginning to speak like you. Anyway.
Sorry about that, Mike. Sorry about that.
Whatever wasn't British sounded British. I don't know if you remember, Dick Clark had some regulars on. They had a song called Lies.
The Knickerbockers, Lies?
Knickerbockers. Lies sounded, I would have sworn it was the Beatles.
It sounds exactly like the Beatles.
So we went against the grain, so to speak. And we were successful at it. After Western Union went down the chart, we were immediately besieged by people in the industry that were connected to us to write another communication song like that. So we caved and wrote Zip Code.
Which wasn't a bad song?
No, it was a good song, a little more melodic and a little Neil Diamond-y sort of type. And I liked it. In fact, it's one of my favorite tunes. But once again, we were in that problem with the distribution still. He hadn't worked it out yet, so we couldn't go full force. It got in the top 40. And so then after that, we decided, but we were full-blown, felt like we were full-blown stars. We were playing at the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles and at clubs in New York. We had our own roadies. We had, all the trappings. And so, but we did not creatively want to be pigeonholed into those communication songs. And so we wrote a song called Sound of Love, which sold, I liked the song. It was directly away from what we'd been writing. It made the top 40 in the U.S. Before we knew it, we had strung together at least 5 top 40, top 20, top 10 songs, which was a lot for, if you get 5 hits over here in America, you're pretty well known. And we were almost regulars on Dick Clark because we did Bandstand a couple of times, but he had a remote show called Where the Action Is, and he filmed it all over the United States. And every time we were nearby, he would just call and say, can you guys come on over and shoot a couple of tunes? And then we went on his tours and all that. So we were pretty big stars.
I want to tell you a little story, Mike.
Okay.
The first 5 American song I ever heard was Zip Code, and it was on this very show. This show was invented back in 1995, and we had one of these legendary old-time DJs, and his show only consisted of 45s, just like your old 45 player, and he would play these incredibly great singles, because I don't think the 5 Americans, your stuff was released here, but I don't think it was a big hit here, and he played Zip Code, and I don't know, just it stood out for me, and ever since I thought, oh, well, that's a band to look and search more about. So the Purple Haze program, Ted Keeley was his name, and was one of those great old-time DJs that knew what he was doing, and he controlled his list.
I see. Well, it was my understanding that Western Union was pretty quickly covered by the Strangers, a group called the Strangers.
Yes. Well, it's funny you should mention that because, of course, one of our previous guests was a member of the Strangers, John Farrar.
Oh, I see.
And John Farrar wrote, he's had a lot of success. You might know of You're the One That I Want with John Travolta and...
Right.
John
Great
Travolta.
song.
Olivia Newton-John, that was it.
Yes, from Greece, I think, or actually.
From Greece, correct. You know more than me.
And also, Western Union was covered by the Searchers in England.
Big feathers in your cap there.
Yeah. We were cock of the walks.
So you were doing the tours, having a huge top 5 hit and all that. It sort of all comes at you Would I be right in saying that, Mike?
Yeah, I think so. And it did all come at once. And because of that, you realize, I know, that creative people do not, especially then, paid zero attention to their business end of it. We lost a lot of royalties on account of that. We just wanted to play. And we wanted to record, and we wanted to do the fun side of it. We weren't interested in the business end of it. So we were easily taken advantage of, and like many groups.
There's a lot of 60s performers who can empathise with you.
Yeah, it's a common story, but it's an experience that I wouldn't trade, of course. And it's an experience that is still with me today. Just wrote my memoirs, as a lot of 60s musicians have. It's called Strung, a 5 American memoir. You can get it on Amazon or any of those online stores.
That tells the whole story there, Mike?
It truly does. I mean, the whole story. I wrote the book once, and it was sort of a travelogue. We played in Chicago, then we played in New Orleans, and then we played. And I thought, that's boring, you know. People want to know exactly what happened. And so I wrote the book again, and this time I included the drugs that we eventually got into, fell victim to, that I especially fell victim to, how I managed to overcome that. So it's a really true, absolutely every word is exactly what happened to us in that book. And I had to wait until I was administrator in public schools here, and I had to wait till I retired before I could write the true story.
And High Strung, it's an interesting title.
Yeah, because that's what we were. We were taught, you might say. We had more energy than, of course, all the kids did back there in the 60s, had a lot of energy, and you could just start banging. I kind of feel like I've read it a few places, that I See the Light was like one of the first real garage band hits. It was just us flailing away at our instruments with a melody. And I remember it was reviewed by the Small Faces in the UK when it first came out, and they really, really liked it, although technically it's horrible.
It's the emotion behind it, though, isn't it?
Exactly. And the people that can recognize that really appreciate and enjoy those tunes.
Speaking of the Beatles, there's an old George Martin story. You know, George Martin, the producer of the Beatles,
right.
He'd hear they make mistakes, but the take, even though there's a mistake in the take, there's just so much passion. That was the one that they kept for the record.
Right.
Even though there was...
understand it's pure raw emotion, and you
can't bottle it.
It's hard to capture that.
It's hard to bottle that.
True, it truly is. But you could go in '67 when we were at our peak. We were playing with everybody, the Doors in Los Angeles, and everybody that was anybody, Eric Burden, Animals. I mean, we shared the show with the Allman Brothers, used their equipment. Lots and lots of people. I know I'm dropping lots of names, but all those guys were there. You know, they were all there. You could just drop in any of the clubs in L.A. or New York, and there's Billy Joel, and as an 18-year-old, guys that you now know that have become legends. Great time to grow up.
I just also want to mention there, Mike, that Western Union was also in the Tom Cruise movie Vanilla Sky.
It was.
Cameron Crowe must have been a fan because he...
Well, actually, it was his wife. I read in People magazine.
Oh, it was his wife.
Yeah.
The Heart Girl.
Yes. I think he was at home at the time, and he was going over the film, and he said, I need something really oblique here during this. She said, what about Western Union? And he said, it's not a bad idea. It made it in. And it was a nice payday for us, the writers.
Yeah. And, so you finally got your royalties there, Mike.
Yes, it did. And I took my 2 boys with me to the theater to see that movie. I made them sit and wait until the credits rolled at the very end. And finally, at the very, very, very end, when everybody else was gone, it rolled and said, music by the 5 Americans. Western Union by Mike Rabon, John Durrell, and Normie Zell, the 5 Americans. I said, look, guys, I finally made the big screen.
Were they proud of their old man?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they thought it was awesome.
That's great, Mike. Well, look, back to the 60s, you released those 2 albums. Now, in the meantime, as we mentioned the Beatles before, things were changing really fast, and you'd already released the I See the Light and Western Union album, and then comes Progressions, which is pretty different, and then, of course, Now and Then. So, well, you knew what was going on around you, didn't you?
Yes, we did. We were totally influenced. When we weren't concentrating heavily on not being British, we were being British on the album. That was sort of a free time for us, and a time when we didn't have to worry about, is this going to be a hit or isn't it? And I'm sure most groups feel the same way. And so we did a lot of experimenting and just having a good time. Like
I said, I'd heard Western Union anyway. In 2007, I happened to be visiting America, and I was in San Francisco, and San Francisco has, hopefully they're still there, a great many record shops on Haight Street, wherever you call it, not Ashbury. And I couldn't believe my eyes. I saw a Five Americans double studio album. I thought, wow, a double studio album of the Five Americans. And I had to have it, of course, and I picked it up. And look, I can only think of Hendrix's Electric Ladyland and the Beatles' White Album at that period to have a double studio album.
Right. What that was the group broke up in 69, I think. Our manager packaged that. I went on ahead and recorded the then part disc with myself and a couple of other musicians. My old drummer and bass player stayed with me. And the now part. And the then part was tapes that we had not released.
Because I noticed, I've got the record here, Mike, that there's writing credits to Norm and John. Most of them are to Norm and John and yourself. But I noticed that in the picture, John Durrell and Norm Azell aren't there. There's two other guys.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you play John and Robin in the In Crowd? Did you play any of their songs?
No.
They had one called Do It Again, just a little bit slower. And it made top 20 here. And who those guys you're looking at in there was part of their band.
Lenny Goldsmith and Bobby Rambo?
Right. So that was after the group had broken up, and our manager was squeezing one more buck out of us.
Well, look, in retrospect, for me personally, I think, because we get 21 songs instead of 10 or 11 or 12.
Right.
And my absolute favourite Five American song, and I don't know why it wasn't a huge hit, probably because back in those days, if it didn't get played on the radio, it wasn't a hit. Virginia Girl, when I first put that on, I thought, wow, what a fantastic pop song. What a brilliant song. And then I looked it up, and it was a single, but should have been a hit. What
was happening then? Don't mind my cutting in. What was going on then? I think it was nearing 70 at that point, 1970, and FM radio had just emerged in America, and Hendrix and a lot of people, the music was just changing. And that song and a few other songs that we had would have been hits if they would have been a little before, released in 68 or 69 even. But once FM radio took over, you could play a 10-minute song on FM. You didn't have to play a 3-minute song. Things just changed, and we could feel it. That's when most of the British groups broke up as well, too. So I think Hendrix was one of the guys that was solely responsible for leading the remnants of the 60s into the 70s, including the Beatles. Their songs even started to sound heavy. So the heavy metal actually just kind of rooted out the 60s guys. And maybe it was meant to be, and it should have been that way, I suppose.
A clearing out.
Yeah, it's like the wind shaking the trees.
Clear out the old wood. I don't know if you like this one, but I've got here listed as your last single, She's Too Good to Me, which was written by, what a great songwriter, Paul Williams and Roger Nichols.
Yeah.
I really like that, and that wouldn't have fitted into the FM slot. But it doesn't stop it being a good song, though.
Right. No, once the group had broken up, my manager and I went out to Los Angeles and went to A&M Records and spoke with, not Herb Alpert, but the M part stood for Moss, Jerry Moss, I think. Paul was a staff writer for A&M, and he came in and we met and talked, and I told him I was looking for a single, and he said, I got one for you. I said, okay, hand it over. And he did, and that was that song. That's how that came about.
Mike, what actually broke up the band?
I think it started out as 20-year-old guys in 64, and pretty soon, before we knew it, we turned around, we were 25, 26 years old and mature, and our eyes were not quite as wide as they were, and we each began to develop, like any band, we each began to develop our own taste in music and wanted to find our own way and see what we could do, because we were still young enough to do that. And we broke up amicably and discussed it before we did it. Everybody was happy with it, and so we just kind of went our own ways.
Because these days, in a successful band, they're less inclined to break up because there's too much money to be made.
I know, but like I said, the 70s was creeping up on us.
There was a bit of a 60s tradition with the 60s bands. You break up when it turns to 1970.
Yeah. Well,
you were just following the tradition.
I would have kept playing as the Five Americans, except that our manager was cheating us pretty heavily.
You'd found out by then?
Yeah, we knew. In fact, we took him to court to no avail. It just didn't pay off. He was booking us one night in Bangor, Maine, the next night in Seattle, Washington. We were one of the hardest working bands ever. And he was sitting up there in the office in Dallas collecting the money.
Counting the money. Oh, well, that's what managers do, isn't it?
Yeah, I had enough of that. 5 or 6, 7 years is enough of that.
It even happened to the Beatles, so there you go. And I think their money problems, they just went on and on and on for a long, long time.
Someone says it's not about the money, it's about the money.
Yeah. Hey, they're right. Mike, so let's get on to Michael Rabon and Choctaw for Uni. Now, I've been looking for this record. It's not easy to find, but I've read on the internet it's a bit of a country rock. So you sort of changed a bit of direction there.
Yeah, that was like a 71 record. The kind of country rock thing was going on, along mixed in with some of the FM music. And I had left our manager, and I was kind of desperate to cut a deal. So I went out to Los Angeles and cut a deal on the strength of me being a Five American, and I recorded that. I recorded that album, and I think it's some of my personal best writing. It didn't really have a chance. It was released on Uni, and at the time, the only two people on Uni was Elton John and myself, single artists. You can guess who got the most attention. Not that I could even compete with Sir Elton, but nevertheless, that record was slapped away from the table like a red-headed stepchild.
And also, I'd like to mention some albums by Gladstone. Now, they released two albums, and the first album featured you on it, and their second album featured a couple of Mike Rabon tracks.
Right.
So
was one of them.
You weren't an actual member of them, you were just helping out?
Well, yes, I was, and I played some gigs with them. I was just freelancing, making money after the Five Americans broke up, and I joined. They asked me to join, and so I recorded a song with them called A Piece of Paper, which was a good song.
It was a hit.
And yeah, it was a hit. It was definitely a hit. And I sang harmony and played, that's me playing the acoustic guitar on there. And I played a few gigs with them, and then we kind of drifted out of that into something else. I was a little, I was not exactly anchored. I was something, but it wasn't anchored.
Well, you were anchored enough to have another album, Texas Till I Die, 1975. So tell us a little bit about the album.
Well, I was still free-floating around and still prolific and still writing, and I struck a deal with a local recording studio there in Dallas, and they said, we'll create our own label and you write us an album, which I did. But they didn't have any distribution. They really didn't have the means to get that album out there. It sort of disappeared into the midst of time.
I've also got a single here on Zodiac. Love is just...
I was still making those deals. Be sure and read the book, because it will tell you why each and every one of those deals were made and what shape I was in when I made them.
You still had value to the record companies, otherwise they wouldn't have released your records even.
Well, I'd written a song called, I forget now, but it was I was still writing. I could write songs that were good enough to catch your ear and to make you want to sign me, but they were just a little bit out of time. I was still writing sort of the old school type tunes then, and there were a few old school labels around, and Zodiac was one of them out of Nashville, and they signed me for a one record deal, and that was it.
When was that, Mike?
I think it was probably 76.
The old-time songwriting's sort of back in fashion these days, though.
Well, that's true, but we'll never have it as good as we had it in the 60s ever again.
And after that, you followed your parents into the education?
Yes, well, yeah, I looked around, and there was no dog and no wife and no kids and no fireplace. I thought, I'm missing out on something. I'm not sure what it is.
Time for a real life, huh?
yeah, maybe it dawned on me it was the real life that I was missing. So anyway, I went back and enrolled in college and graduated and got a master's degree in administration, and I was a school administrator for like 15, 20 years, and finally moved back home here. And I just retired as a middle school principal here. Like I said, I waited to write High Strung till after I retired. And so I'm drawing a nice retirement, and I'm married to a beautiful lady. She's still teaching. So, life is good. I got 5 acres and a nice little 3-bedroom home on 5 acres, and a dog and a cat and a fireplace and a tractor.
Well, Mike, you've done a lot more stuff than most people in the world, so...
Well... Yeah. I feel it.
Yeah. And also, you've written a novel too, Billy, Don, Basic and Me.
Yes, and I've just finished one I want you to read. It'll be available. My publisher just told me yesterday. It'll be available in Australia. It'll be January, but it'll be available. It's called Meet Jack. And don't ask me what it's about, but it's good, if I say so myself. And it's my second novel. It will be available on all online sources and distributed by Ingram, and they cover everybody. So I hope you'll look for it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any of those online places. You can order High Strung right now, and you can order Billy, Don, Basic and Me. I'm really just continuing what I did before while I was playing music. I'm writing. That's what I do.
All right then, Mike. We'll better leave it there. Also, just want to mention that you are an inductee of the Oklahoma Music Hall of Fame, even though you're a Texan.
Don't say that so loud.
Sorry. You old Okie boy, for all those listeners there, of course.
Okie. been a real pleasure speaking with you, Nick.
It's been great. Look, you've given us a lot of pleasure with your music, and it's still, you know what, when you create this music, it's basically there forever. You know, the records still survive, and everything is on the internet, and now with, I mean, hopefully you're getting your stuff on the MP3s and CDs so they can last another generation until the new format for the next generation or whatever.
Well, to that end, I'll tell you, Sundazed, and it's Sundazed, Sundazed Music out of New York has picked up our masters. It's picked up everybody's masters. You can get the best of the five Americans. You can get progressions. You can get now and then. You can get whatever you want.
Fantastic. That is brilliant.
Sundazed.com.
And what about Michael Rabon and Choctaw? That's the one we really want.
I've been trying to get them to go ahead and buy the tapes from Universal for that. As of yet, have not done that.
Well, look, we'll wait for that. Mike, it's been a pleasure.
Okay. It's great to talk with you, Nick, and God bless all of you there.